All right, my friends, this is a special episode. Here's why. I started Moneywise a while back, and it was a small project, and I basically said, I don't know if I'm going to continue doing this. I'll only do it if you guys like it. And you have. You've asked me to do more episodes, and so I have. And now we are 25 episodes in, and so I wanted to do an episode that looked back at all 25 episodes, and I wanted to check my notes, which I do take notes, and I wanted to let you know some of the highlights of the episodes and lessons that I've learned along the way. And if you're new, welcome. I'm Sam Parr, and this is Moneywise. You can scroll through Instagram for just 30 seconds and you're going to see a ton of junk out there on how to get rich, but nothing that teaches you how to handle life after you've already made a little bit of money. I'm co-founder of a company called Hampton. It's joinhampton.com. We create in real life groups of around 8 people who have similar sizes and types of businesses that you have. And you meet once a month to discuss all types of stuff that you can't discuss publicly or with other people, sort of like the topics on this podcast. Our members range from people with 10 employees all the way up to companies with thousands of employees who are publicly traded. So check it out, joinhampton.com. So I see all these conversations that happen, and a lot of them happen privately. And I thought, I think some of these conversations about money, particularly amongst the high net worth people, I think they should be made public, hence this podcast. So with Moneywise, we want to provide real advice by talking to real people who have made a lot of money and who are radically transparent about their numbers, meaning their monthly expenses, their portfolios, and more importantly, all the personal issues and problems that come with being successful and how they're solving them. Lesson number 1, finding purpose after early retirement. So years ago, I heard about this concept called FIRE. It means financially independent, retire early. And typically the people who are into that, it means like lean FIRE, meaning you want to save as little money as you can possibly save in order to live like a very frugal lifestyle, which is cool. That's great. But there's this other thing called fat FIRE, which means you want to make a lot of money, like millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, and retire early, or at least be financially independent, and you can live lavishly for the rest of your life. So it's people who want to make a lot of money and retire early. And when I heard about this concept, it frankly changed my life. Not because I wanted to retire early, but at the age of 30, it was my goal by that point to be not retired, but financially independent. And so making a lot of money at a early age, enough that you sort of just have an FU number and don't really have to rely on people for anything. And this is a concept that we've explored early on with guests Ryan and Jeff, who both realized that they had enough money to never work again. And so they stopped. They stopped working. But soon after stopping working, they realized that retiring isn't just about finances. It also involves planning how to find purpose, fulfillment, and identity outside of work. This is what Ryan said.
I think the identity problem was big for me the first year. I think I realized that was because my self-worth was based in how hard I worked on something, like how many hours I put into something, how many times I think about it, how many podcasts I listened to, and Jason Lemkin blog posts I read, and like newsletters I could, like, it was all based on all of this like hustle. I didn't have that anymore. And I was searching for that next kind of grind or addiction to work on something. And that's that lost period.
And both of them realized that they had to find some new sense of purpose to be fulfilled. Jeff told me that finding something to put his energy into has been a key to living a happy life in post-retirement.
I probably would feel lost and like a total waste of space. But because I've had that project and those hobbies and those other interests, that has really helped give me meaning and purpose.
And so here's the first lesson. Retiring early, if you're not prepared, I know it sounds like a dream for everyone, but it can absolutely lead to a loss of identity. And having a sense of purpose is a big part of being happy. So if you're planning to retire early, if you're one of those lucky few that can pull this off, find something that you can sink yourself into with all your free time. Lesson number 2, raising resilient children in wealthy environments. I'm a new dad. I have a 1-year-old. And one of my biggest concerns in life right now is making sure that my kid grows up to be a healthy, happy, and productive human. I think this is something that everyone worries about. However, a lot of people who listen to this podcast, they are in the situation where the money, it actually complicates things, which is why I had Dr. Becky on the show. Dr. Becky, by the way, just Google her. She's a big deal in the parenting space. And with Dr. Becky, we talked about parenting kids in a wealthy environment and how to make sure that they grow up to be resilient. And she kept coming back to a key emotion that is crucial.
Frustration tolerance is actually one of the most important skills for life. Not only to avoid entitlement, it's actually the skill that helps you learn. It's the skill that helps you do hard things. Because you and I know no one gets to any place by avoiding frustration. It's actually the people who are like, frustration is just the name of the game. When I'm trying something hard, I'm frustrated. So learning to tolerate frustration, to me, it's one of the most important things I try to focus on with my kids and have other parents focus on with their kids.
And by the way, this is incredibly similar to what Taylor Adams told us. So Taylor Adams comes from a multi-generation, multi-billion-dollar family. So his family has been worth billions for a long time. And Taylor has dedicated his life to helping wealthy parents raise their kids in a way that empowers them to find purpose and to avoid the situation where being born into wealth robs them of that. He told us that failure is something that is essential for your kids to experience.
Founders know that the success journey is highly nonlinear. It just takes forever. Success, in my mind, is nothing more than a compounding and perpetual series of failures where we learn how to fail small while failing forward until one day we wake up and we're like, holy crap, I've actually built something that's significant. But growing up in an environment of extreme success, there can be the subtext of you can't fail. If you think about it too long and you think about how success is measured within that relative context, you go, man, I'm never going to be successful. I might as well not try. And that's okay because I know that there's resources that will take care of me.
And so lesson number 2 is this. The most important thing you can do to raise resilient kids is to allow failure and frustration into their lives. Avoid providing too much of a safety net and encourage resilience through discomfort and effort. For this next episode, we get to hear from one of my favorite people we've ever had on this podcast. His name is Mike Beckham. Mike owns a company called Simple Modern, and he's worth around $200 million. His goal is to donate 50% of his income every year. He's also committed to donating 10% of all the profit from his company. He gave us a ton of great advice on how to donate your money effectively, from figuring out where to donate, how to do it, whether it's personally or through a business lens, how to handle it so it's tax efficient and all that type of stuff. It was great. But the biggest takeaway from that episode was how giving impacts your life.
Giving is in many ways the antidote to the cancer that we have inside of ourselves. It is a thing that naturally helps keep in check. And I have a little voice in my head that is like, it's all about you, do whatever you want. And anytime I intentionally choose to not put myself first, I intentionally choose to use my resources or my time to serve other people instead of myself, I turn the volume on that voice down and I win the war a little bit that day.
Now, when I talked to Mike, I brought up the point that a lot of wealthy people, they wait until they're close to death or until they're dead to donate their money. But Mike argued against this. Instead, he thinks that you should develop your giving muscle early on.
One of the stories I'll share sometimes when I was in the nonprofit world doing ministry stuff, there were a lot of times where I would take college guys out to lunch. And I mean, as we've talked about, I didn't have any money, but I would always feel like I should buy this guy lunch. And I remember being like, man, buying this guy a $7 lunch right now feels financially painful. But the thought that I had at the time was, you don't get a chance to go back ever and take advantage of an opportunity to be generous. And I just realized like, hey, there'll be a point in the future where I'll probably have enough money that $7 won't matter to me, but I can't come back and have this opportunity again. And so I just built the muscle really early on of leaning into being sacrificial and being generous. And as the money has scaled up, that muscle has been there and has been able to kind of bear the weight of it.
Now, the main lesson here. Giving is a really great way to keep your ego and your lifestyle in check and help you feel more happy in general with your life. It's a muscle that you really should start flexing as early as possible, not just waiting until after you die. Lesson number 4, stress and growth versus peace and letting go in business. In our 10th episode, we spoke to my friend Marshall. Marshall has been running a business called Shepherd, which is insanely profitable. But he realized that money was keeping him tethered to something that was mentally bringing him down. And so he gave it up.
I was pretty consistently personally bringing in about $500,000 per month in cash flow. And you could do anything with that kind of cash flow a year. And it was growing. I didn't feel like it was peel where it's like, oh, maybe it's going to fall apart tomorrow. And so, strong offer came in. Obviously, we negotiated and everything. I was trying to get the highest number. But by the way, like I basically delegated my entire role. Like we hired a CEO. Prior to hiring the CEO, like we had a COO that came in place that took off 95% of my duties. So it's like amazing cash flow, and I don't really have a day-to-day role necessarily. Why sell? And the way I thought about it was a few things. There's basically two types of regret I could have. I could have regret of greed, where I do sell and this thing goes to $1 billion and man, I could have been even more wealthy. Or regret of loss, where something happened or, it fell apart in a few years, or, we got sued out of existence, or, whatever. Something happened and it goes to zero or it becomes much less. And I had the opportunity to sell for life-changing money. And of those two, it hurts way worse to have regret of loss. So that's kind of how I thought about it. The other thing that contributed to like deciding to ultimately sell is like, even with Peel, I had hired a general manager. Like I got really good at delegating, and you can delegate yourself all the way out. But when you get to that level, like it's no longer about the time that you're working on the thing. It's about the mind share that it takes up in your head. And you can't really like get rid of that when you're the majority shareholder. Mind share, is real. It's like, don't really have day-to-day duties, but it's still hard to be present playing with your kid or, on a date night with your wife. You're still worried about things. It's ultimately still your responsibility. I have young kids, I have a wife, and it was just like, you know what? This is life-changing money. I think it makes sense given all those factors.
To summarize, selling your company or not selling your company, it's more than just the money. And it's important to separate yourself from the numbers so you can make better decisions based on what ultimately makes your life better. Unless, that is, you're willing and prepared to make sacrifices in your life, which is one of the many lessons that Scott Galloway, one of my favorite guests, shared with us in his episode. The more you want, the more you must be willing to sacrifice.
Young people talk about wanting balance in their lives, and it's like, okay, well, then you don't want to be rich. I've had two periods in my life. One where I had a lot of balance, good relationships, great shape, hobbies, and periods where I had no balance, was working all the fucking time, was incredibly anxious, my relationships were suffering. I was losing money, my net worth was going down in the former, my net worth was increasing in the latter. It is very difficult to maintain balance if you want to achieve a certain level of success. I'm not suggesting you can't have it at some point. I have a lot of balance now because I had very little in my 20s and 30s. But it requires a sober conversation. If you want to move to St. Louis and coach Little League and work 40 hours a week, have at it and have a decent home for not a crazy amount of money. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with that life. But when I talk to young people and I ask them how much money they expect to make, most say in the top 10%, if not the top 1%. Like, well, if you expect that, then just stop using the word balance, because it's a competitive economy. There are a lot of people willing to work very hard. And I often joke that my success in my 20s and 30s cost me my hair and my first marriage, and that it was worth it. I have a lot of balance now because I didn't have much when I was young. So you can have it all. You just can't have it all at once.
So this is lesson 4. Balancing growth and a peaceful lifestyle aren't really two things that always go together. If you want to grow now and have peace later, that's fine. But it's important to set expectations and actively decide what you're willing to sacrifice. Marshall and Scott, they chose two different things, but what unites them is that they were able to consciously make these decisions, which is a huge lesson here. Another one of my favorite episodes is when we spoke to Jennifer, and this episode, my jaw dropped. I messaged her afterwards and I was like, this episode, it honestly shook me. She's someone who I had never met her before the episode, and I came out of that interview with a ton of admiration. She shared in brutal detail the story of her marriage, divorce, and the role money played throughout the entire relationship, including the red flags in her husband's behavior around money. There were a lot of great insights from her story, but one in particular that stood out was how she chose to walk away from her marriage.
I took a settlement because it would be over. I just decided to treat it as a bad investment, get my money back, and walk away. And I got it in cash. If I gotten it any other way, I would have wound up with properties and stocks and cars and things like that.
Her lawyer encouraged her to not take a settlement. Of course, it's in the best interest to say that and to get you to fight as long as possible and to get as much liquid assets as possible. They get to take a sizable chunk of that. However, her lawyer shared that the settlement could be a risk for her business.
She said to me, "This is a terrible idea. You're taking a risk." She said, "I understand. You're a bright young woman. Your business is doing well now. It might fall apart tomorrow." And I've had clients who had divorce settlements based on businesses that fell apart. And she said, he has his money, as he said, he's liquid. He has his money. He can sit on a beach. She really thought I was doing the wrong thing.
Jennifer decided that continuing to fight this in court, it was not worth her time. Something has also got to be said for just what that means for her peace of mind, from just moving on from a bad situation, even if you might be getting less than what seems fair.
I was like, I can fight this for 2 years. It had probably cost me $100,000 to $200,000. And at the end of 2 years, my business might be worth so much more that not only do I not get any of his money, I have to give him a bunch of my equity. And I thought to myself, I was actually on a long drive across the country where I was spending the holidays, and I knew the amount of the settlement that was proposed, and I was just sitting with it. And I thought to myself, am I really okay with that? And my brain said, there's more money where that came from. Cut your losses and bet on yourself and just move on and build your business.
That episode had a ton of great insights into financial red flags and relationships, and in general was just a very fascinating and frankly riveting story. So go check it out. But the main lesson is this: don't let money hold you down. There's going to be times when leaving money behind is best for your happiness, and a brutal divorce, it sounds horrible, it could definitely be one of them. Lesson number 6, financial stress is inevitable, but it won't stop your life. This next story is a wild one. Dominic lived out a nightmare scenario. He made a bad business deal and lost 95% of his wealth literally overnight. But what we learned from him is even in that seemingly worst case scenario, life goes on.
When I got here, I own a bunch of land here. And I'm just in the middle of the sagebrush. I lost all my money. I lost my girlfriend, and I'm non-competed out. So I can't do what my previous company did because I still have a non-compete from the acquisition, and I can't do anything related to my previous company. I just looked around. I was like, well, I guess I'll build my house now. Once you start feeling like a victim, you'll never get out of it. So just don't. Everyone I know is more mad about it than I am. For everyone else, it's a story. But for me, it's something I had to decide whether it was going to affect me or not.
To put that financial loss into perspective in the context of life overall, let's talk to Mitch. Mitch is worth over $100 million, but when his wife was diagnosed with cancer, he would have happily switched places with Dominic.
It was really meaningless after all. And you really are just going to give it to somebody else and have no say. The thought that really came through my mind was it worth it? Like, how many hours did I not have to emotionally give to her, all for the pursuit of this money thing that it turns out is really valuable, but I could have actually helped her with just a large life insurance policy and made a tenth of what I've been making, and it all been fine.
And so the lesson is this: finances, they're going to go up, they're going to go down. But obviously, I hope not as much as Dominic's. But in the greater context of life, it's nothing. So you can't let it keep you down. Money is not everything. It's important, but it ain't everything. Instead, focus on the real precious things in life, like your loved ones. Lesson number 7, beware of burnout after leaving a business. Now, let's talk about burnout, which after talking to Ryan Beagleman in one episode and Pete in another episode, it seems like something that even if you're not cognizant of it, it's very possible that burnout is impacting you. Both of them saw their burnout manifest in their lives, but in very different ways. Ryan realized it when he was doing retirement modeling and realized he was completely overspending.
So the biggest mistake in pre-epiphany, Ryan, is he was just severely overinvested in cash, i.e. underinvested in, the market, because I thought I'm going to start another company. And this is where I underestimated how much I was burnt out. The way I think about it now is I didn't really respect money.
That's interesting.
I think the way I like to think about it now is that money is sort of like its own entity, like almost like a person, or it's like an energy. Like if you think about it, you work hard, which takes a lot of energy, and you store the energy in money.
Pete's story, it's definitely a bit more drastic. He didn't fully realize it until he was deep into the decline of his new company.
So I had felt like my big exit, that was my achievement that made me arrogant. And then the software company was the mistake that had made me humble. I was pretty burnt out prior to even acquiring the company. So throughout this whole process, like I had reached even like a new level of burnout. So I didn't even want to sell the company. I didn't want to do anything. I'm just like, just shut it all down because I just want to forget about it. I just want to like pack it in a box and go like put it up in like the corner somewhere and close the door and just like have it gather dust.
Pete is now respecting his burnout and giving himself time to rest and reflect on himself and his values.
Yeah, doing a lot of healing from trauma growing up, like really trying to understand myself, my inner voice. I had left a huge deficit in terms of like my wife and my kids just for the amount of time spent on business. So kind of like viewing this time as like a gift because I have kids in like elementary school, junior high, and just being really able to be like, hey, I'm going to like show up to all the things. Like we're going to spend time. We're going to do the things that I wasn't doing before. I'm almost overdoing it in a sense because I felt like I'm kind of like digging out of a hole. And then also it's like really to see like, how can I really contribute to the world?
So your lesson is this. Being in tune with your energy and being able to recognize burnout is incredibly important for longevity. Be mindful of burnout after exiting a business and plan for a sustainable transition into your next phase of life. This next one we're going to talk about, I honestly think it's every young man's dream, which is to move to a small town in the middle of nowhere and kind of like be the big shot in town. And the story was with Travis. Travis made around $50 million, and he made it from his hometown of around 2,400 people in rural Canada. And his office is on Main Street, which means that he sort of became like the unelected, unofficial mayor of the town. And his office was like this community center. And he was right in the middle of action and in the middle of everything. And I loved it.
You know, if we're looking at wealth where it's just a balance sheet, you know, straight numbers, then yeah, like I'll never be as wealthy as a lot of people in a big city center. But wealth to me is lifestyle. When I look at what makes me wealthy or not, the money is obviously important because it creates opportunity, it creates freedom for us to like travel and do these things as a family. But I'd rather have my family and my lifestyle here being worth a tenth of it in a big city and not have any kids. I'd be miserable if I was my age with no kids and I had 10 times the wealth on paper. I wouldn't consider myself wealthy. I would just consider myself rich. One of the things about a small town is you kind of want to stay quiet and under the radar. You don't want to be super flashy. And I like that. I didn't want to go out and buy a bunch of sports cars or, you know, spend my money on things. I wanted to take a few years, get it invested, see how the investments are doing. And then hopefully as I see that wealth grow, I'll loosen up a little bit.
Way back in our third episode, we spoke to a guy named Cam who, like Travis, lives way out in the country. But he takes it a step further. Despite being worth $150 million, he only spends like $5,000 a month. Why? Because he doesn't see the point in making a lot of other purchases.
I was making good money and I saved up $13,000 and I bought a 2004 F-150. It had 20,000 miles on it. And that was one of the most gratifying, rewarding purchases I've ever made in my life because I had reliable transportation. I remember I was counting change for gas to go to the Comedy Store and these other places and not knowing if my truck was going to break down. And to have that stress and that anxiety removed from my life was such a wonderful thing.
The lesson here is more of a reminder to keep your options for life open. You might be in business and you might be wildly successful, but I think sometimes you should still consider living a low-key, low-profile, less demanding lifestyle. And lesson number 9, know when to walk away from earning more money. And for the last lesson, a reminder that you can get off the treadmill at any time. And really, you should continuously evaluate when the right time is for you. Laura Roeder, she was one of our most recent guests, and this was her plan from the beginning. She wanted $5 million in liquid money, and after she made that, she was going to bounce and retire. And that's exactly what she did.
I've been lucky enough to know a lot of really wealthy, successful entrepreneurs. And I've just been able to see firsthand that a ton of money does not add happiness to your life. Enough money to not have to worry about money is huge, is absolutely huge, right? Like, we don't have to think about which after-school clubs we want to send our kids to. They can sign up for whatever they want. We always buy the organic groceries whenever we want. Like, that's a game changer. That's an amazing life. But adding extra houses in, or having a, $20 million house instead of a $2 million house, or having 4 cars instead of 1 car or whatever, not only does it not increase your happiness, I mean, it can be neutral. Like, if you're someone who likes cars, you can certainly get enjoyment out of buying some cars, and it can be fine and no big deal. But it often comes with massive downsides. And I think a lot of people who are more like cognizant of the life they want to live do reach that point where maybe they do make things bigger and then they go back and simplify.
And we had another guest named Jeff, and he realized he was due off the treadmill way too late.
I'm a recovering money addict.
Jeff's worth over $120 million, and he finally decided enough was enough. And so he shifted his mindset to focus on living freely and spending his wealth thoughtfully, and came to accept that accumulating money for the sake of it was distracting him from his real purpose in life, which was to be happy.
So I crossed 100 million last year. And when I crossed that threshold, guess what happened?
You wanted more?
Almost. I got protective of it. I started thinking, okay, if the market's down a little bit, gosh, am I only 97 now? Am I less than that? Today's a good day. I'm, 112. Like, this is a good day. And it's so weird.
You can't lose a comma. Losing a comma is a big deal.
It's another digit. Yeah, we're humans. We happen to operate on a base 10 numeral system. So like, there's this thing. It doesn't matter, man. It doesn't matter. And I'm reminding myself by explaining it to you. I think this concept of enough, this is the, if you will, the corner I'm standing on in the world, is helping people who have enough, who know they have enough, not go back and do it again for more money. Do you know anybody that has just like gobs of money, barely spends a fraction of it, and they're still slugging it out?
Yeah, a bunch. That's the majority of people, I think.
Run your own race, everyone, right? But for me, the whole point of the money was to enjoy it, to give it away, to live life. The point of the money was not the money.
So the last lesson is this. Be sure to recognize when the pursuit of more money no longer serves your happiness and well-being, and have the courage to step away. To cap it all off, here's a speed run on a few more lessons that I personally feel very strongly about, things that I've learned in the last 25 episodes. The first, in most every case, it's never going to feel like it's enough money. No matter what you have, if you think that you're going backwards or that you're going to run out, which it's very normal to feel like that, even if you have $1 billion, $100 million, or $10, you are always going to feel like it's not enough. And lesson number 2, this one, it's kind of cringy for me to say it, but I do think that money will make you happier to a certain extent. There's that survey about $75,000 a year and like you're not happier after that. That's nonsense. I think it's a lot higher. I think that it's like actually 50, 60, 70. I don't know where it is, but it's like 50 or 60, $70 million. I think it's a lot of money. I do think that having more, to a certain extent, it does make you feel more comfortable. However, the pursuit of more oftentimes can make a person miserable. And that brings me to number 3, which is I think that pursuing money is awesome. I love building businesses, but I think pursuing money for money's sake, it's an empty feeling. I think that instead you have to pursue providing value to the world, and hopefully the output or the result of that is money. And I think that's a much stronger thing to do for the soul. I think it will make you feel better. I know a lot of people, a whole lot of people that have made a lot of money or are still making a lot of money doing shit they don't even like, and they're miserable. But the ones who have met, like for example, Mike Beckham, he does what he loves and he has a purpose, and it just so happens that it makes him rich. And so you have to have a point for why you're doing this, not just for the sake of money. Now, my friends, I hope you have enjoyed this episode. And by the way, the reason I do this podcast, like I said, is I have this company called Hampton. It's joinhampton.com. It's a community of founders and CEOs. If you own a business, whether it does $3 million in revenue or $300 million in revenue, you can go to joinhampton.com, apply. And we put you in these groups of 8 people who you meet with in real life once a month. And you're able to have conversations that you can't have anywhere else. And This podcast is a result of Hampton. I see all these amazing conversations that happen behind closed doors in our online community. And I thought this has to be live on this podcast. You really can't find this shit anywhere else. And so that's what Moneywise is. And so if you are a business owner and you liked this conversation, check out Hampton. And last but not least, 25 episodes in, these guys have produced 25 episodes for me. It's called Lower Street. They are the production company that I use for this podcast. I told them I would give them a shout out every single podcast that we do where I'm happy with their work. And that's been 25 out of 25 episodes. And so if you have a business and you want to create a podcast like this, which by the way, this podcast has like transformed my business. And if you want that same result, you guys have to check out Lower Street. They have this new offering called Authority, and it's basically allowing you to make a podcast just like this. And so if you're a founder or a business leader and you don't have a lot of time but you still want a podcast like this, you have to check it out. So it's lowerstreet.co/authority.